Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast. Today, I'm going to be doing a solo episode expanding on my own story from my personal life before bodybuilding and then that transferring over into being a competitor and pursuing the sport of bodybuilding. Now, in previous episodes, I've delved into some of my own struggles, some of the things that I've faced, and it's been so well received because, of course, starting the podcast, the mission amongst a lot of different things is to empower others and share my own personal story to be able to help you know that you're not alone. And this is something that's so important to me because the majority of my life, I feel like I have been very alone. And that spans right back to as far back as I can remember, right? There's a lot that happens in life that we cannot control. And the reason for today's podcast is, like I say, to expand on my own story, but to also go a lot deeper than I have before. Now, if you listen to this podcast and you're a bodybuilder, you're a competitor, then you may well think, how is this going to relate to my own journey as a competitor or bodybuilder? And my hope is through going into my own experiences and then throughout my competitive career, we can start to see much more insight of the behaviors, the experiences I've had as a bodybuilder. There could have been less emphasis on some of the struggles I've had if I had dealt with some of the things that recently I've been working really hard on. And the victim mentality that I'm going to talk about today, when I actually dig down and start to reflect on my whole life, for the majority of my life, most of my life, I have lived inside my own head as a victim. And like I say, in life, we're dealt with a lot of challenges that we can't necessarily control ourselves. And then going back through my life, the series of events that I've been through, I can understand so much more as to how actually one event led to another, led to another, led to another through the same mindset, the mentality of being a victim. And I didn't really understand this. I didn't really, I guess, address this because I would go from one scenario to another, and I didn't realize this was happening. Now, like I say, I'm addressing a lot of things now. I'm digging deeper. And in this episode, I'm going to be delving into a lot of personal information, and whether it's right or wrong in different people's eyes, different people's ears, because this, of course, is a podcast to share to this level, that is a personal preference. And if you're listening and talking about the things I'm going to speak about today, if that's not the right time for you to be listening to something of this context, then that's okay. It's not the right time for you to be listening to this. And as I guess, heads up, I'm going to be talking about things of an abusive nature, including sexual abuse. I'm going to be talking about my childhood going into my adulthood, how that victim mentality formed and continued to propel throughout my whole life till recently. And this is purely to offer strength for anyone going through something in life or who has been through something in life of a similar context. This is, like I say, to show that you're not alone. And also recently on the podcast, I've made it my mission, I guess, to expand the guests that I have on, to delve deeper into mental health, because it's such an important topic. And I'm sure you'll agree that most of us have something that we could maybe look at and work on, we could improve on. And of course, when we relate this back to bodybuilding itself, the opportunity to work on your physique and your aesthetic is something that we get given as a choice. And it's fucking epic. And I'll always say that. What bodybuilding has given me as a person is it's hard to put into words. It was finding bodybuilding was the first time that I felt purpose in life. From having so many years of not feeling good enough, of feeling like a victim, it was my gateway to thinking, okay, so I can pour everything into something and get a direct reward for my hard work and my effort. And I spent the majority of my bodybuilding, particularly the first 10 years, doing this in a town where it was pretty unknown, doing this pretty solo, although I was married at the time. I took this on as my own solo venture, which I've delved into before, and what that portion of my life looked like. And I felt like I could feel a sense of belonging, I guess. And that then led to bodybuilding being my everything. And I mean everything. Through preps, through off seasons, I didn't put a foot out of line. Even things like in off season, having an off plan meal, I would speak to my coach first. I would agree what I could have. I would then have it. And then I would be back to my plan. In preps, it would be more of a case of reining me in rather than needing to tell me more. You don't need to do that for me. When I go into a prep, my life is then taken over by my coach, right? And that's how I see prep. It's not a negotiation. It's not how can I make this easier? How can I swerve out of doing this? How can I find ways to not have to do certain parts of a prep? For me, I thrive on being uncomfortable to push into extremes. But this relating back to the topic today, I understand it so much more as to why I can do that. And that's not me blowing smoke up my own arse, because like I say, I was in a town where no one really knew about bodybuilding. I always did this for myself. I don't give a fuck about what other people think about what I do as a bodybuilder, to be quite frank, because this is for me. And actually, when I really dig down on it, the neuroticism that I found, particularly in a prep, but even like I say in off season, was built from my own internal drive to do my absolute best and know that if I put a foot out of line, that it's me that's done that. And that's enough for me to just stick to the plan and do what I need to do and not question that. And there's elements of course, when you're bodybuilding, when you're coached, it's that speaking to your coach to gain education into why you're doing certain things. I'll always empower that, because I want to know why, but I'm never going to question the process. And that's built in me. And I used to say, I don't really know where it came from. How am I able to just do and push and push and push? But now, having the recent experiences of digging down into my past and actually being quite realistic and truthful with myself as to what I've been through, how that has sculpted me into who I am today, I get a lot of answers. So in my last episode where I spoke about my story, so Sarah's story, I spoke about portions of what I'm going to touch on today. But like I say, I'm going to go into more depth. And it feels like the right time. I'm often led by what I would say the universe giving me signs. And again, not everyone's going to agree with that. Not everyone's going to go, the universe, that's cool. They're going to go, what the fuck are you on about? That sounds woo-woo to me. But I have found that myself practicing gratefulness, being accepting of who I truly am, my life has changed dramatically, particularly in the last 15 months. And it's only getting better the more I am led by what I feel is the universe. Now, the best place to probably start is maybe the most toughest bit that I'm going to speak about today. And that's right back to really, really young. And then I'm going to go through what has happened to me throughout my life to deliver me here today. Now, these experiences I'm going to talk about, I haven't spoken about to this level apart from people very, very close to me. And like I say, I feel like it's time to do that, to delve into that. And it's for me to do that from a neutral place, as it were, a place where I'm showing vulnerability in order to hopefully reach out to other people that may be experiencing things like this. And before I get into it, I just want to say that I'm never ever going to share my own story and experiences to make other people feel like I've been through more, or I'm better than anyone, or I've been through something, so whatever you're going through, you should be able to push through that as well. That is not the point in the podcast today or any of my solo episodes. It's to offer relatability, to resonate with you. And I'm acutely aware at all times that having me in your ears, whatever phase you're in, that I am in a place of influence. And that is very, very important to me. And I do not take that lightly, because if you're listening to this now and you hear about my story, then that is a powerful position to be in. And I must always, always stress that I'm only ever doing this to help others and empower others. So, like I say, probably the most traumatic part of my life, going back to when I was a child. So, from the age of 5, my mum raised me as a single parent, me and my brother. And my first and only real memory of my own father was when he left, and that was when I was 5. And all I can vividly remember is when him and my mum had an argument, and he smashed the door between my kitchen and my living room, and it was a pane of glass, and it smashed everywhere. I don't remember any context. I just remember that vivid memory of it happening. Now, I then didn't really know any different. As a child, when you're of that age, so it's quite well known that between the ages of dot and 8 is when you're most impressionable, and you start to form your personality. You start to form more memories, more solid memories, and that then transcends into, being an older child, into teenagers, into adult life. And I would say from the ages of more like sort of 6, 7 is when I start to recall trying to gain a personality per se, and starting to get friends and learning at school and all of these things that you remember more as you grow a little bit older. So from when he left, I have this vivid memory. But then between 5 and 8 or 9 years old, I just remember being raised by my mum as a single parent. I don't really recall having a dad. So I don't really feel like I missed out per se. And I also had my granddad, who stepped up as my dad, my father figure. And that then, I guess, filled that gap to feel like there was not a gap. Like I didn't miss out on having a dad per se. But as I grew older, when I was around the age of 8 or 9, it came out that my dad was being trialed in court for being a paedophile. And I remember at around that age that we had like child services or family aid, whatever we want to call that, visit my family home and sit me and my brother down and ask us, did my dad touch me inappropriately? Do I remember him making me do anything to him? And I was so confused. I didn't understand what was happening, why these people were in my house asking me this at such a young age. And that was the first experience I had of my dad being taken to court and being a paedophile. And it was such a confusing time, like I say, and I didn't understand. I didn't know what it really meant. And being at that young age, I was immature, I was young. And that then started investigations with my mum having visits, my mum having to go and talk through things. And the conviction was based on him abusing his stepdaughter. So he was married before my mum, and the lady he married had 2 children before he had a child, 2 children with her as well. So there's 4 of them in total, and 2 were from a previous marriage. And she had said that he touched her, that things had happened, etc. And that then went to court. And when it got to the final part of the hearing and her testimony, she pulled out and decided to not testify, and that ended the court case. But during the time of them gathering evidence, they needed to speak to my mum about this. Now, my mum has a personal background of being abused. And for my mum, this was hard in the fact that she had been abused by her stepdad, and then she had married an abuser and had children with him, and then potentially had subjected me and my brother to this happening to us. And that was very hard for my mum to comprehend, and that's been hard for her to deal with. And to see that torment for her was tough. And one thing that she did say to me was that when I was a baby in a cot, one day she came into the bedroom and dad had me on the bed when I was a baby, and there was a stain on the bed and stain on my baby grow, and she saw it and didn't know if it was what you'd expect it to be, and it got brushed over and it wasn't really recollected. I don't think she maybe realized at the time that that could have been a thing, because why would she? And that was the only thing she could relate back to when they questioned whether he had done anything to me. And that, for me, does sit in my mind that maybe something did happen. But now I realize that I can't do anything about that because I don't know if anything happened. And I don't feel like I really need to know, because it's not going to bring me anything to delve into that. And he's actually dead now, and I'll never get that answer, and that's okay. But that's where I feel like I slipped into that victim mentality of feeling like I was a victim. Because I guess the questioning initially and being asked about this, it's like when you're being questioned by someone, when you're being asked directly about things that you don't know about, you go into defense mode because you don't know what to say, you don't know what to do, you don't know what the answers are. And that then, for me, made me feel like a victim. Now, my granddad, like I say, stepped in to look after me, and we forged a really, really strong relationship, which I'll always be grateful for. He was literally my everything, and he's actually passed as well now. And the relationship we had, like I say, he became my father, and he was my comfort. He was my everything. Like, granddad was like my best friend as well. And he always would try to not really address that situation and didn't really want to believe in it and play into it. He was very old school, and I think probably that played a big part into it. And he didn't cope well with mum being depressed, suffering with mental health through all of this and through her past trauma. And they would often fall out because he would say, "Why do you need to take medication?" Snap out of it. Mum would then retreat and have 6 to 8 weeks of very, very bad episodes of mental health. Mum has always struggled with mental health. Since meeting my stepdad, who she's with now, it's really, really helped. But through most of my childhood, it was tough because I had this experience and realizing what my dad was. And then my mum's behavior around being depressed and suffering with mental health, I almost felt like I had to step into a mum role to look after her because granddad wouldn't. And I became that like middle person between mum and granddad. And again, the second type of experience that led to me feeling like a victim. Why do I have to look after my mum? Why won't my granddad speak to my mum and vice versa? And it was tough. It was really, really tough. It led to a point where my mum's mental health was so bad that I had to take time off work. This was later in life, where she had stopped taking her antidepressants and she spent weeks in bed, not eating, laying in bed, just looking forward at the wall. And I had to take time off work to spend a couple of weeks with her. I actually got signed off by the GP to look after her, to get her out of bed and feed her, and sit there and watch my mum just looking forward and spoon feed her because she wouldn't eat and she didn't speak. And there wasn't anything there. And having that role as almost that role reversal of feeling like I was stepping into being a parent, it was hard. And that was from that young age because that was up to my working life. But through that whole period, from being 8 or 9 to adulthood, where mum initially found out about what my dad was, to recent years where she's found happiness with my stepdad, I was in that period of feeling like I had to be strong. I had to support my mum. And then leaning back into the victim mentality, it was like not actually really seeing that for what it is and just accepting that that was my role. That's what I had to do. But never really addressing how that felt, never having anyone to confide in, because my granddad, my closest person, my best friend, I couldn't talk to him about that because he just didn't understand whether he wanted to or not. He was of that mentality of get the fuck over it and move on. So that then became part of my mentality to feel like I'm being punished. I'm having to do, look after my mum. I'm having to help with my brother. I'm having to be this middleman between everyone and try and keep the peace. Now, let me tell you, when I look back on this and I'm truthful about it, that's draining. It's very, very emotionally draining to constantly be trying to keep the peace. And people listening now that find themselves in a scenario where maybe you're not happy in your relationship, maybe things are hard in a working environment, maybe you feel like people are taking the piss out of your kind nature. All of these things that feed into you feeling like a victim, small things build into bigger things. Thoughts become things. So if you feel like it's always, things are always being put on you, you're the one who has to deal with everything. It keeps feeding this mentality. And I talk from experience because it does, it truthfully does. And reflecting on it, I like I said at the start, I understand exactly why I found what I did in bodybuilding. Now, if we rewind back to being at that young age at school and starting school, little school, what would be an exciting time for some children, I would hope. For me, starting school, I remember, was fun. It was exciting. I made friends. I remember being little Sarah at school, and you start to build friendships. You even like taking your school bag with your books and all of these things, getting excited to walk to school and that type of stuff. I remember those good parts, but I always remember at little school when a period of time, and this is when I'd found out about my dad, he was not allowed within a 3 or 5 mile radius of me and my brother and my mum because of what had happened. And he decided to get a job at there was a house that ran adjacent to the school that I went to. And the gardens of this house was on one side of the fence, and the other side of the fence was the school playground. And he worked on the gardens at this guy was called Charlie at the school. And he was always like a weird guy. As children, we'd take the piss, and he would just stand there and stare at all of us. And as children, you take the piss, you laugh, and you're like, who's that weirdo? And you're immature, you don't really understand. And we would always look and be like, who's this weirdo? And then my dad got a job doing his gardens. And one day I remember I looked through the fence and I could see my dad there, because I still remember what he looked like, and we still had family photos and stuff knocking around the house. And that day he was standing there with Charlie, and they were both staring at me in the playground with the other children. And I didn't know really what to do, but I remember that immaturity, that stage of my life. So what I decided to do was tell my friends that my dad was a pedo. They didn't ask anything into it, and we started chanting that through the fence and said to get away. Like, when I look back, I'm like, when you're in a mindset of a child, it's a very different space. You don't have life experience. You don't really know what the implications are, what the impact is of what you say and what you do. And then I remember he still would come every day. And then it got to the point where I told my mum he was working in the gardens next to the school. And mum went to the police, went to family services, and he wasn't meant to be within that space. And he got taken in for questioning, and everything then disappeared because he didn't appear again. And another thing that contributed to that that powerful figure of seeing them two men, one that as a child we were like, he's a weirdo, then my dad, who'd been now labeled a paedophile, both standing there. My dad was pretty tall, and that sort of powerful stature, staring through the gate, well, through the fence at me, it was like, this is feeling like the power over me. And my way to get back at that was to tell my friends, to start shouting abuse and try and be cool, try and not lean into it. And now I know that was from a place of immaturity, but also I would say a defense mechanism to try and, I guess, push back on what he had done, but not really knowing how to do that. And then that then transpires into, when I left little school, going to the first part of secondary school, and our schools were separated, so you had lower school and upper school across the field. And in the first portion of secondary school, I got bullied a lot. And I spent many lunch times, and I touched on this in my last episode of my story, eating my lunch in the toilet. I got told that I was going to get my legs and arms broken. I can honestly say I did not do anything apart from what I believe is present as a victim. And I do believe that the more you present and give off the energies of being a victim, of being weak, the more you believe that you're weak, that you're not good enough, the more you attract this type of person to potentially bully you, to abuse you, to take advantage of you. That's my personal belief. Again, this episode is based on what I would say my reflections have brought me. This doesn't mean it's right or wrong. That's not my place to say. But through my own discovery and also working with people as a coach, there's such a strong correspondence with, if you lean into being a victim and focusing on the negatives in your life, it amplifies that and you attract the wrong people, circumstances, and your life becomes a very lonely and negative place inside your head. And that's what I truly believed with how I ended up getting targeted by bullies that I didn't even know. They were kids that were older than me. And that propelled throughout the first part of secondary school. Until the bullies moved across the field. I moved up a year, they moved up a year and moved across the field. And I didn't have to see them again. And I could come out at lunchtime. I remember the first time I ate my packed lunchbox sitting on the wall outside. And I was so happy because I could feel the sun. I could be outside and I could eat my lunch without being scared that I was going to get my arms and legs broken by bullies, male and female, the year above me, because they would go around and bully weak people that were not going to fight back, because I wouldn't fight back, because I felt like I couldn't and I wasn't good enough. And during this period of time, when I started to be able to come out of the toilets at lunch, I started to make more friends. I started to feel a bit more comfortable. And during this time, mum was still a single mum. Mum was working 8 jobs, and that was hard in itself, because we were at school, we'd then walk home, have dinner, and then mum would be doing ironing or other jobs, enveloping leaflets into newspapers, stuff like this, which we'd sometimes help with. But mum was doing everything to get food on the table, and we were just, doing what we needed to do with homework, with school, etc. And I wouldn't ever feel like I didn't have the emotional support from mum. But when I was getting bullied, I didn't feel like I wanted to tell anyone, because I didn't want to add to the pressure that my mum already had. I didn't want to cause more drama to what my mum was already going through. So consequently, that was all experienced alone. Unfortunately, going up a year and then starting to come out, I then encountered a new set of bullies that were in my year, and I got told I was goofy, that my hair was horrible and big, that I was ugly, a lot of abuse about my appearance. Again, I was still in that mindset of a weak-minded person. I wouldn't fight back. I would just go off and cry or just accept that that was my fate. And I didn't have a dad that wanted me. I didn't have the strength to push back at bullies. I wasn't good enough. I was ugly. And throughout my whole school life, all the way up till I left, when I did start to make friends and groups of friends, I always felt like I was the lower level one of the group. I always felt like they were prettier than me, they were more skilled than me, they were more likable than me. Boys would like them more than me, which is what happened. I wasn't ever like the one that the boys would fancy, or it just wasn't a thing. And the bullying carried on throughout my whole time at school, through gossip, through not being able to stand up for myself. I just got picked on the whole time. And then I actually spoke about this a fair amount in depth when I did my first podcast on my story. When I then met a boy that was a year older than me when I was across the field in big school, and he actually knew the first set of bullies that said they would break my legs, etc. And you may have experienced this in life, where in towns, in small towns, you have families that are known in the area, and these families that are known in the area for being hard, this is what it will always be in, like, he's fucking well hard and whatever, as you have when you're a teenager. I understand not everyone has this, but you'll be able to relate if you did. His family knew the family of the bullies that I encountered, and we ended up in a relationship, and that then gave me an identity. I was Daryl's girlfriend. Nobody fucks with his family. And that was my first sense of like, holy fuck, this older guy is interested in me. His family's like untouchable in the area. He's hard, smokes weed. Wow, I've finally found somewhere where I can belong and be protected. But I was still in that mentality. So when we got together, I was young. I was like 14 and started smoking weed, started drinking a lot with friends, and I was a virgin, and I was scared. Like, I hadn't even really kissed anyone properly or anything. And I remember the experience that was probably quite a big contributor to me not being necessarily comfortable in sexual situations. That I caught him having sex with another girl, and he told me that men need to have sex, and that he was cheating on me because I was too frigid and I wouldn't lose my virginity to him yet. And I said, oh, okay, I understand. I'm really sorry that I haven't had sex with you yet. And like, even saying that out loud now, it's pretty warped. But like, he told me, this is what men need. Men need to have sex, and you're not doing that. And it was like, oh, it's my fault. He needs to be able to do that. And consequently, the following night, I got my friend to get me some alcohol, and I ended up drinking 2 liters of vodka because I was planning to lose my virginity to him, because I didn't want him to leave me, because, like I say, it's the first time I felt like I belonged somewhere. And I ended up in hospital having my stomach pumped because I drunk. Like, it was pretty serious. The doctor said it was bad. I was very ill and having my stomach pumped, etc. And in essence, I was too scared to have sex with someone without having alcohol, that it ended up like that. And it then led to, I did lose my virginity to him, and it was always quite a sordid thing. Like, I'd remember we'd go round, me and some friends from school, and we'd sit there smoking weed on lunch break. And then he'd say to all my friends, you guys need to sit outside the bedroom because I need to have sex with Sarah. And my friends would sit outside the bedroom and we would do that. And I didn't ever like it. I didn't ever feel anything. It was not good. But I always thought that that's what it was. That's what having sex was. It was an uncomfortable thing that men needed, and I wasn't meant to enjoy it. It was, yeah, it was not a nice time, because I was with him for like four, four, 4 or 5 years, and it was like that the whole time. It wasn't good. Like, I never got anything from it other than feeling like I had to do it. But I then put up with, he cheated on me multiple times with younger girls. He would be messaging other people. They'd show me messages, and I always thought, no, 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 I can see the good in him. I love him. Because I wasn't prepared to step away from finally having a protector, from finally having someone that could look after me through being hard, no one messing with his family. I thought that that was the best place for me to be. I didn't want to let that go. And his family were like not nice people. And there was many experiences through that time as I was getting older. There was one experience where later in life I got called into the police to make a statement, where his older brother shut me in a room, got his dick out and told me, suck it now, I need this. And I said, what about Daryl? I don't want to do that. And he said, it doesn't matter about Daryl. He's not coming home now. And he shut the door behind him and moved towards me. And I was in the corner of the bed crying, shitting myself, because he had his dick out and I didn't know what to do. And thankfully, someone came home and he unlocked the door and went out the bedroom. And it was like, holy fuck. And he later got put in prison for raping young girls. And that's why I got called into the police station, because I went forward. I actually saw it on Facebook. If any women have had experiences with this person, please come forward. And I decided that it was the best thing to do if I could give evidence to help other females that had had this. But it was so traumatizing because he was so close to me, and I didn't know what to do as a young girl. And I think I was probably 15 at the time. And then it was like, do I tell Daryl, his brother who I'm with, what do I do? And I just didn't say anything because I didn't know what to do, because he would potentially say that it was me or whatever. But another example of feeling like I'd been victimized by someone, I guess in power, someone stronger than me, bigger than me. And he was a fucking nutter, I tell you that. I saw him beat the shit out of multiple people. And this is not just a fuck around. This is beating people to the floor, punching them in the face multiple times, knocking their teeth out, and going in. Like, he was unhinged. And I'd seen that, and then I'm locked in a room and he's coming towards me, pulling his trousers down, and I don't know what to do. And that was another contributor to me thinking that sex was not a pleasurable thing. It was something that men needed, that women weren't meant to enjoy. And like I said, that carried through my whole life. It was like, if you want a man to like you, you have sex with them, and that's how you get them to stay with you. And during the time of being with Daryl, I mentioned there that I smoked weed, and that became an addiction. I smoked weed every day. I didn't go out the house without at least having a toke on a joint. I felt I was unable to operate unless I'd smoked some weed in order to function as a normal person, what I thought was a normal person. Let's not forget, when you're addicted to something, you have to get your kick to feel like you're okay, that you're normal, and that you can deal with whatever comes in life. But the heavy abuse of weed did not help my mental health at all. And it started to affect school and home life. At the time, I was still living with my mum, and she'd been remarried to my stepdad before the stepdad I have now. And we formed quite a close bond, me and him. And as I started to smoke more weed and, in essence, rebel, that caused a lot of pushback from my mum and my stepdad. And they started to, like, I'd get home from being around Daryl's and they'd pin me against the wall and open my eyes with their fingers, look in my eyes and accuse me of smoking weed. And of course I'd say, no, I haven't smoked weed. And I say, of course, as a teenager in that mindset, it was like, no, I haven't smoked any weed. I know what you're talking about. And I remember it got to the point at times where I'd be walking home and I'd be so paranoid in the dark because I was high, I was on my own. Every noise, I'd be like, there's someone there. What the fuck? What's happening? And I was literally living on edge all the time. And this continued to get worse and worse and worse. And it got to the point where one day I had an argument with my mum and stepdad, and my stepdad put me in the bath, turned the shower on with cold water. My mum was there as well, and I was high at the time, and they said to me, you need to deal with this. You need to stop rebelling. You need to stop smoking weed. You need to treat us like your parents and with respect. And I said, why are you putting me under the cold water? Why are you putting me in the bath? And at this point, I was still young, 14, 15. And my mum hit me, put a bar of soap in my mouth, and I remember biting the soap, spitting it back out of her and saying at her, and leave me alone. And my stepdad was there. Like I said, he put me in the bath, put this cold shower on, and that consequently I said, I'm leaving. And I had a top and some trousers on, no shoes, no socks, nothing at all. And I left the house. Mum shut the back gate and locked it, and I went, I'm going, in my own mind. And I remember walking in the dark across one of the fields near mine, and the grass was wet. And like I say, I had no shoes or socks on. And I walked across the grass thinking, I deserve this. I should be punished. I should be a victim. I am a victim. And that led to me being homeless for 6 weeks. So when I see homeless people on the street, when I see people struggle, people that are addicted to drugs, alcohol, people that have no shoes on, people that are living on nothing and begging, I see them differently to maybe what you would or other people would, because I know what that's like to live with nothing. And through that 6 weeks, there was multiple occasions where I had to walk the streets because I didn't have anywhere to sleep, and I had to walk the streets and stay awake because something could happen. Something could happen to me. And it was scary. Like, I'd hide in alleys or little crevices, fields where there was like bushes, but it was cornered off, because I could then hide and take shelter. Or if I kept walking, if someone tried to approach me, I could run. I could get away. And that's what happened for the whole 6 weeks. And during that 6 weeks, I had to befriend people to find a bed for the night. There was men that I befriended to stay the night, and I was with Daryl at the time, but I'd like sleep in a bed with a guy. Nothing would happen because I'd say I don't want to, and they'd let me stay. But it was really, really uncomfortable. And there was 2 occasions where they would try to touch me, they would try to do things to me, and then I'd have to leave. And then I'd be back on the street, because the reason I couldn't just stay at Daryl's was because the police were looking for me. My mum reported me as a missing person, and I was a child, and they grew weed at their house, and the police would visit his house and question them and say, "Where's Sarah? Do you know where she is?" And his dad ended up saying, after me staying there for the first couple of nights, "She can't stay here. She's not welcome in this house because she keeps bringing the police here." So the time that led to this was when the police visited and I was there, and he had a window shelf with curtains, and I had to stand upright because it was a big window, and hide behind the curtains when the police arrived. Dark pair of curtains when they searched the place to look for me, because I was a young person missing. And he had to hide all of the weed plants, and it got hella messy, and I was banned from the house. So I was also not able to see Daryl, who I like. Like I say, I walked in on him sleeping with another girl, and I forgave him because he told me that's what happened, and I thought that I loved him, right? So then I couldn't see him. So I don't have parents in my life. I don't have my granddad. I don't have my little brother. I can't go to school because I'm a missing person, and this was the last year of education during GCSEs, etc. And I can't see Daryl. And then I'm forced into befriending people, not nice people, not nice people, other drug addicts that were not nice. That's not me saying that drug addicts aren't nice. This is me saying that the people I was mixing with were not nice people. And this led to me having to live on scraps of food, going through bins to find food, not going to school. I had a family support worker when I was at school to help me, because I always got put in isolation because I'd get bullied and then kick back and try and rebel. She agreed to meet me in the local McDonald's in Bognor during this time, and she was the only person that I had access to, and she was not allowed to meet me. But she said to me, and I'll always be thankful for this, she said to me, "I'll still meet you and we can still talk on the phone, because I'd rather meet you than and know you're okay than you be on your own." So an hour a week I got to go and see her and message her if I needed to, and she helped me get back to school after this period of time. And it was crazy. Like, I remember once, because I didn't have any clothes, that a friend of mine said to me, "Why don't we go and steal some clothes from New Look in Worthing?" We got the train there, bunked the train, and she brought some wigs. She said, "Put this on." And we both put wigs on, and we went and got some clothes and stole them, and then ran through the wigs in a big wheelie bin. And then I had some clothes to wear. And it was like wow, I've got some clean clothes. I wasn't able to shower. I wasn't eating properly. I didn't have any clothes. I just had that one outfit when I left the house. And this type of thing started to happen. My mum was looking for me at the time. And like I say, I was a missing person. That was scary. Like, I can't quite get across what it feels like to walk the streets as a 14, 15-year-old thinking, am I going to survive today? Am I like, what's going to happen? I don't know. I just hope that I'm going to be okay. And it's crazy to think back because, of course, we box these portions of life off. And the reason I do get emotional when I talk about this is it's not now from an emotional standpoint of it, it upsets me per se. The emotion comes from me feeling really sad that because I can vividly see like little Sarah, I say, like little me, so sad that I didn't have a childhood, that I didn't have teenage years where I felt like I was a person, that I was worthy. And this emotion during this podcast is a sign of how sad that makes me to see that person. But the emotion I let out is also a sign of being vulnerable and being okay with that. For me, it's something I speak to people a lot about. If you want to cry, if you want to let it out because of past trauma from something that's happened to you or something that's happening to you now, let it out. Cry. It's a good thing. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to accept that things have happened to you. It's okay to ask for help. And that's what I didn't realize through this whole period of time. And like I said right at the start, it wasn't till 15 months ago and a little bit before that where I started to take control of my own happiness. And then I say 15 months ago because that's when I started to accept help from Matt. And Matt, I don't think will ever truly know. Like the first person that's actually accepted me for who I am and offered me safety, and to realize that being independent and being strong isn't a sign of true strength. Being true to who you are and finding a purpose that makes you happy, that drives your internal happiness, and being able to share that with someone is honestly the biggest gift I've ever been given, because I didn't understand what it was like to be loved properly, but also be able to share my life with someone. And that's something I'm always be extremely grateful for. But when I was in the victim mentality and mindset, every relationship I had with a guy, I was attracting the same type of person, someone that would want someone who is vulnerable, someone that can be controlled. And that's what happened during that my first proper relationship. And like I say, I was on my own during that time. I had that one connection with that family worker, and I was I was homeless for that period of time for 6 weeks. And the reason I ended up being taken home was because my boyfriend at the time broke someone's wing mirror and the police got called. They found us out on the streets and they asked our names, and I said my name and didn't think of anything of it. And it came up on their register that I was a missing person. They put me in the police car. They took me straight home. I said in the car to the police, my mum hit me, my stepdad threw me in the bath. I'm scared to go home. I don't want to go home. And they said, we have to take you home. It's going to be okay. we're going to speak to your mum. My mum told them my nan, who adopted my mum, was going to come round and be there, and I wouldn't be left on my own with my mum, because that's what I was scared of. And they said okay and left me with my mum and me and her on my own. It's difficult for me because this then led to a sense of mistrust in the law, in the police force. That's through my own experience. I never want to blanket term anyone or any group per se, but that was then really hard to have that trust in potentially the police service per se. But I can actually look back and reflect, and before being homeless, I can see that the behavior that led to my mum doing what she did and my stepdad and what have you, I was smoking a lot of weed. I was pushing back. I wasn't listening to my parents. I was being a little shit at school. I was trying to fit in. I was trying to be cool. I'd act up in order to try and get accepted. I would get bullied. I would then act up and almost put that on teachers and try and be Billy Big Balls. And then I would smoke weed. I'd go home and say, I haven't been smoking weed. What are you talking about? And it was this vicious cycle. And if I reflect truly, it was my mum found it hard to control me at that time. I was going down the wrong path. I remember she'd say, I don't want you to be with Daryl. I don't want you to smoke weed. And I would see that as her telling me what to do. And I knew best at age 14, age 15, because I was trying to push back, find myself. I couldn't stick up for myself when I was bullied. So I would try and stick up for myself in other areas. And I didn't really realize that my behavior was not respectful to my parents. You know, I was going against what they were saying. I was trying to fit in with Daryl. I was trying to be this girl that would have sex with him, that would smoke weed, that would drink. And I can only imagine and assume that from my mum's point of view, that would be very hard to watch unfold, for her to know what Daryl and his family were like, for me to be fully invested in that, and for me to slip away as her child into what could be what, you know, me maybe having a child at a young age, me becoming addicted to drugs, all of these things. But I still feel like feeding into that victim mentality, it all keeps leading into one portion of my life into the next, into the next. And when I got taken home, it became a very testing time. And I remember at one point my mum couldn't cope with me for a period of time. So I went to stay with my nan in the 6 weeks holiday, and it was in the middle of nowhere. There was no telephone signal. And during that time, I would speak to Daryl on the phone, but I knew in the back of my mind he'd be sleeping with other girls, that maybe it wasn't going to be a thing anymore because I was 6 weeks away from home. But during this time, just before I'd left, I'd met his uncle, an older guy, part of the family, part of the hard. You don't fuck with these people. He took my number as Daryl's uncle. And I remember he started messaging me, and then I'd stayed at my nan's. And I was feeling Daryl slip away because I wasn't there to have sex with him and provide what he needed. And his uncle was messaging me saying, I want to meet up with you. I can look after you. I can be there for you. Don't worry about Daryl. And this undercurrent of I don't know if you call it grooming or what you would call that, but that then fed another purpose of someone wanting me, of feeling like, wow, an older man is messaging me. I feel like this could be a thing. And that then led up to, I remember I met up with him before Daryl was gonna be there. So there was like a couple of places we all hang out, and his uncle messaged me saying, I'm going to come to Daryl's and I'm going to be around, and we'll meet up and what have you. And there was times where he'd ask me for a kiss, and it became really, really weird, uncomfortable. And I told Daryl about it, and actually Daryl confronted him, and he was like, you're not messaging anymore. And it was like, whoa, this is Daryl's uncle. He's a fucking nutter. And it was like, whoa, another experience of him sticking up for me. And it was like, again, that sense of belonging, staying tied into that relationship. And I then went back home after spending this period of time at my nan's, and my nan was amazing. Like, she was super, super cool. So, so cool. And when I got home, nothing changed. It went back to being bad again. And I was still at school at this time, and my auntie's parents, through marriage, they offered for me to live at their house while this was all going on, and I didn't want to live with mum. And I remember staying there, and bearing in mind this is not long after I'd been homeless. I'd been living here, there, and everywhere. I'd lived at my nan's, at my house, at Daryl's for sections of time, homeless, etc., like I say. And I then got the chance to live at their house, and they had, I always remember, they had this hot tub, and it was a hot tub bath. And where I'd been homeless before living with them, I got in the hot tub and I was like, wow. Like, I felt like this sense of, oh my God, wow, like hot water, clean towels, clean bath, clean everything. It was like that for me. I think it sounds silly, but even every time I have a bath now, Matt jokes I don't spend long in the bath. But even getting in the hot water and feeling that, being grateful every time I have a bath, I'd imagine comes from that. Being able to be clean. Like, when I wash my hair, I know most girls are like, I love washing my hair, but I'm like, I love washing my hair. I love it being clean and refreshed. And I think it probably goes back to that first time. I think probably I would say in my life that I actually felt safe in an environment. Like, I wouldn't say I didn't feel safe at home growing up, but since finding out about my dad and being scared that one day he might come to our house or something like this, then being homeless, then being pushed from pillar to post, I got in that hot top bath, and I remember opening my arms out on the sides, letting my legs go free, feeling the bubbles in the jacuzzi bath type setup. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is amazing. And living there was like elite level living. They had such a nice house. They were pretty well off. They wanted to help me. And this was, you know, I'd, I'd been put in my nan's for 6 weeks. Then they needed somewhere else to put me while I was rebelling. Didn't, refuse to live at home. And because I was still under 16, it was appropriate to find somewhere else to live, and they'd offered to help, and that's where I lived. And it was a special time. And I remember there was a couple of meetings that we had around this time with family services, social services, where it was like mediated meetings with my mum. So my mum would sit across this big boardroom table. I would sit on the other side with them, my auntie, uncle, my auntie's mum and dad. My mum and my stepdad would sit the opposite side, and they talk about integrating me back to living at home. And I really didn't want to go home. I really wanted to stay there with them. And it did come to an end, my period of time with them, and I did end up going back home. But I think that was probably the first catapult of me feeling grateful for like environment and objects, because objects weren't really a thing for me ever. But like that bath and clean towels and this elite level of living that I'd never had was very novel, and it was something I didn't want to let go of, but they could only help for a certain amount of time, and the sort of ruling was that I'd integrate going back to live at home, and eventually I did do that. And then when I turned 16, I decided to move out with Daryl and his mum and leave home again. And me and Daryl were sort of engaged, whatever you whether that's a real engaged or not as that age, but we were engaged. And we lived with his mum, who was addicted to weed as well. She had multiple sexual partners, and there'd often be men around the house half naked, different men every time. Again, not an ideal scenario for my own view on what sex was. The weed addiction got worse and worse, and I left school at this time, and started going to college. There was always something inside me that, even though I had to have some weed before leaving the house, I still went to college every day. I still went to college, and I still looked at getting a job when I could, and I got a job, and I held that down. Partly because Daryl went on work benefits. His mum didn't work as she was on benefits, and she wanted us to pay rent to live with her, and we needed to buy food, and I was the one who needed to do that. Daryl told me he couldn't do that, and I needed to do that. Very similar to the sex side of things. And I then got a job in a bar as a glass collector. I went to college to get us weed, to give rent, and to get food. And like, when I say I didn't know anything about nutrition, I didn't know anything about nutrition. Training, fuck all. I didn't drink water until I was 18. It would always be like minimal fluid. I had squash, but I would say, oh, I'm not drinking that. Of course, it's very different now, but anywho, I was a very different person then, and it led to me trying cocaine, various other things, speed, etc. Speed I started using, and that was probably my first time of like getting into behaviors that are maybe similar to bodybuilding. So I tried speed diets. I tried that for not eating because I didn't have the money to buy food. So when you use speed, it suppresses your appetite, and you can not eat for like days at a time. And I mean that. So the speed diet is what a lot of people called it. And it was in at that point. Me and my friends did it where you do a bump of speed, and then you'll take turns a few hours later to all go and do another bump. You do that throughout your shift at work. We did that when we worked in the pub. And then you go out all night, and then you wouldn't sleep, and then you do that the next day. And then that would not mean that would mean I wouldn't spend money on food. And speed is very, very cheap, hella cheap. I don't know if it is now, because it's not a vibe. But it was cheaper than food. And then the food I did need to buy was for Daryl and his friends. Daryl didn't actually do speed. I did this through sort of work and meeting other people outside of that. But he would smoke weed and get the munchies, and his friends would. And I remember every time I got paid, which was weekly, I'd have 10 to 20 pounds to spend on food shopping. And I'd always remember I'd buy like a multi-pack of Space Raiders, a packet of like Wagon Wheels or Gold Bars, and then like Smash super noodles. There ain't no protein there. And then I'd go and work, and I'd get home, and they'd eaten it all because they'd get the munchies when they were stoned. And I'd be so sad, and I'd cry and be like, I don't know what to do because we've got no food now. And it was such a weird place to be. But I kept going. There was something in there that kept me going, and I don't really know what it was. I knew that one day everything would be okay, but nothing could quantify that. But there was something in me, And whether that's my affiliation with the universe telling me it's going to be okay one day, you can get through this. So, like I say, I went to college and I managed to do the beauty therapy course. I did a massage course. I passed those. And during this time, I was smoking weed, doing drugs, drinking every weekend a lot. And it was hard. And during this time also, with the behavior of Daryl, him being depressed, I believe, not working, smoking a lot of weed, getting me to have sex with him. Sometimes he'd get me to have sex with him with his friends in the room and tell them to look the other way. And I'd see that they would be looking, but I'd just think that that was normal. There was a couple of times where I didn't know what to do, and I'd lock myself in the bathroom and cut myself with a blade in the direction you're meant to, not, in the direction of the vein. And then I get scared and wrap it up with some material or a t-shirt or whatever and try not to let anyone see. He'd be in a different planet, really, really high. And I just did it on my own in the bathroom to myself. And when I would cut myself, it would be to relieve pain and pressure. It would feel good to do that. And I always thought, if I die, I don't have to experience this pain anymore. I can be free, I can be at peace. And that was always my driver. I didn't tell anyone. It wasn't a cry for help per se, although maybe it wasn't. It's one of those, but no one knew. It's not till I look at the scars on my arms where I'm like, that happened, but it feels like it's almost like it didn't happen, like I can't recollect it of such. And that continued and continued and continued, the sexual stuff and everything else. And then Daryl decided that, so I got to 18 or 19, 18, 19, and he decided he didn't want to be with me anymore. And I was heartbroken. I turned into a bit of a mini stalker. Like, he said to me, you need to move out of my mum's, and chuck me out. And then I'd sit outside the house. I didn't want to tell my mum that I needed to go back home. The relationship wasn't great. And he then, it came out that he was seeing another girl, a family friend. She was 16, and it was like, the first thought was, he's traded me in for a younger model. I'm not good enough. And the only reason I ever would have got out of that relationship was if he ended it with me. Now I look back and I think, thank the fucking Lord. Like, fuck. Because if I'd stayed there, who fucking knows where I'd be right now? And that, again, was a message from wherever that may be, that it was a sign that I could move on from this. And I had to contact my mum and say, can I move back in? And I moved back home. And let me tell you, that was a fucking stark contrast. That was hard to accept. I needed to go back home, swallow my pride or fucking Billy Big Balls act and go, I need help. And I was able to reduce smoking weed. I was able to have an element of safety back and be at home and reconnect with my mum. And that was a turning point for me. I cried and I cried and I cried. But then it was okay. I realised it was okay. He definitely moved on. He didn't want me. I'd message him. I turned into, like I say, a bit of a stalker, messaging him, phoning him, turning up at his house. I realised I got the picture. He didn't want me anymore. Hard, but very good. Now, I'm then found as a victim again. Consequently, between the ages of 18 and 21, I would go out. I would get fucked, pissed. Like I say, I dealt with sort of the addiction to weed, etc. I didn't smoke as much weed, but I still smoked a bit. But I started drinking more, and that was not a good spot, because I would have I haven't slept with many people, and I'm not just saying that, but I'd have, I had a handful of one night stands during that time, and I didn't, it wasn't enjoyable. None of it was enjoyable. It was always like a punishment or a need for other people, for guys, and that I felt wanted. And I'd dress up in clothes that would expose myself, but I was the most unconfident person ever. I was not happy with my body, definitely not happy with my body, not happy with myself. I still had these hang-ups of being goofy, of being not good enough, of still being at school and being that person hiding in the toilet. And then, to be fair, that period of time, it was fun. Like, I reconnected with my mum. She would pick me up from the nightclubs. I remember every time she'd say, just ring me. She'd wait by the phone. I think it was almost her protection mechanism for that security, for me being back home and for her looking after me. She'd meet me, pick me up at 2 a.m. I was smashed on alcohol. She'd pick all me and my friends up and drop us off at our houses. I'd go home and I'd be fine. She'd make me breakfast the next day. She'd nourish me, right? And it was quite a laugh, but I was still in this body that I didn't want to be in. I was still incredibly negative about myself, but I put on a good face. And I became the person that people wanted to be around because I was fun. I'd take the piss out of myself. I would get smashed on the shots, and I would be, out there and whatever. And I'd be a fun person to be around. Then I realized it was a new sense of belonging for me. It was time for me to go, this is cool. I can find a new purpose in life. And that felt good, right? Like suddenly I could find this new, like, element of fun that I hadn't had before. And I realized that I started to become this person. Like, people would invite me out, they'd want me there. And that was very, very cool. And I soon stepped into this, like, almost protector mode. So I would find myself as, like, if my friends got started on, I'd suddenly be the one to be like, leave my mate alone, fuck off. And started to find this new person, this new identity of, I could protect people. And I feel like it's probably because I hadn't been able to protect myself for so long, that then suddenly I wasn't able to sit back and allow people to be bullied, to be started on. And that felt good. Like, it felt really good to be able to be the person that, if something started when we were out, everyone would look to me, and I'd go in with this, you know, I'm here, I'm gonna protect my friends. And Grandad was there throughout this time. Like, he loved to drink. Like, I'd go around there, we'd have a drink together, then I'd go out, and mum would, like I say, pick me up. Life felt good at that time. And I always thought that I would be the single person. I would be on my own for the rest of my life, because I didn't like having sex with men. I didn't feel like I ever wanted to go back to being in a relationship since being with this first boyfriend. And it was like, I'm independent, I'm an independent woman type thing. And then I met Kieran through, I did a swimathon, a charity swimathon. I started to go into the gym a little bit, and I started to sort of almost then grow out of this period of time. I finished my massage course and I went on to do the personal trainer award at college. And like I said this earlier, I didn't drink water, I didn't do anything. And it started to get this, like, newfound, okay, so I could do a bit of the gym. And that was super, super cool. And anyway, it led to me then doing some cool stuff. Like, I did the swimathon, and I did it at a gym in Billingshurst, which is where Kieran lived. And I'd qualified, so that was my last year of free education. and I got a job at the place I did the swimathon at, and it was like a 45 hour minute 45-minute an hour drive from my place where I lived at mum's. And I was so excited to have my first proper job. Like, I'd worked in the bar and cafes and things like that, but this was like the first real job. And it sort of brought about this new energy to my life that maybe I didn't need to go out and get pissed all the time for this, like, to feel like a person. Like, I had a job that was worth investing in, and then this newfound love of like the gym and fitness, which was like never ever on my radar. Didn't really like sport, school, etc., and it was like not a thing. And I remember when Kieran, who's my ex-husband, came to join the gym, and they said to me, "There's a fireman here. Do you want to do his induction?" And I was like, "Yeah, whatever. Like, I don't really care." This is where I was definitely at a point where I had no interest in being with a guy. Like, I was happy being alone and single and whatever. And I thought that was for the rest of my life, right? And he came in for this induction, and I just showed him the kit. And then when we started talking and whatever, after doing the induction, he'd come and use the gym. Like, he's added me on Facebook, we started talking and whatever. And he then asked me to stay over at his, and I was like, why is he asking me to stay over? Like, I don't really, not catching, I didn't really find him attractive. It wasn't like, he was all right, but I was, still in that spot where I was talking to other guys. I was, messaging on Facebook or whatever, what you do when you're sort of younger and you're not with anyone. And then we had snow that year, and I got stuck in Billingshurst. I couldn't get home, couldn't drive my car home, and all the trains had stopped. And he said to me, "Why don't you stay at mine? Nothing needs to happen." And I remember I stayed at his, and I said to him, "Nothing's going to happen, because what do you think I am, a waste gash?" Now, I don't know if you know what that is, but it was my way of saying, I ain't going to sleep with you. I'm just staying over. And I remember the first time I stayed round there, it was this, like, very similar to the experience I had when I stayed at my auntie's parents. It was a big house. His parents had money. It was a place of safety. It was a place of living that other than that, I hadn't experienced. It wasn't my usual environment. And I remember, like, with his mum and dad having money, like, he had money. He was like this person that it would be like, wow, I can't believe he's interested in me. Like, I'm a skank compared to him. Why would he want me to stay at his house or whatever? And I remember staying there and nothing happened. I said to him, this isn't, it's not me. I'm not going to do that. It's not what I wanted to do." And then, of course, we messaged more. And then it became a thing where it was like, is this going to be a thing? And he says to me, he fell for me when I did the induction on him. And he'd bring me like dinner to work and stuff like this. And then I remember the first time we kissed in the car park of the leisure centre. And it was like, maybe this is going to be a thing. And I still had this like mentality, this mindset of very much being not good enough and being this sort of victim through my whole life. Why was someone that had money, that could look after me, that could protect me, maybe, why would they be interested in me? I'm still ugly, I'm this, I'm that. And then we started going out, like, we became boyfriend and girlfriend. And it was, at first, he was very jealous, because I was in that mindset. I was in that place of being the fun loving person that stuck up for everyone, that everyone wanted to be around. I didn't want a boyfriend. I was finding myself. And he didn't like me speaking to boys in the gym or at all, really. Messaging friends. I was, at the time when we met, like I said, I was messaging other guys, nothing of any real substance, but just that general, what you do when you're a younger person. And I didn't realize how much it was affecting me, but he would check my phone. He wouldn't want me to go out. And I then found myself back in that scenario of being emotionally bullied, should we say? Being, I always refer to it in my own mind as being caged up like a dog that had been naughty. And I used to say to him, it's like you want me to be locked in a cage and you just feed me through a little hole and you don't want me to speak to anyone else. And it was intense. It was so intense. Like like I say, check my phone. I then always thought, I'm never ever gonna get better than this. I'm never gonna have someone that will look after me financially, that will love me for me, which it transpires that it probably wasn't like that. That would want me, that I could have a future with, that would potentially be a good enough dad to children, etc., etc. And I remember after the first 3 months of us dating, it got so intense, it was too much, that I said to him, I don't want to be with you anymore. I need a break. And he broke down and he put it on me. I can't be without you. I love you, etc., etc. We had a period of time where we went together, and then we ended up sleeping together again, and I got back with him. And then I remember thinking, if I get back with him this time, I think it'll be forever. I don't think I'll get away. And I still did it anyway. And he was always that jealous person. He was always that controlling person. He wouldn't let me pay for anything. He wouldn't want me to do anything. He would say, you shouldn't be working all these hours. I want you here with me. Have this money. And I thought that was an element of safety and that he loved me. But when I look back, I realized that actually it was controlling. He was controlling me and didn't want me around other people. And I remember he used to get me and my mum a pizza on a Friday night, and we didn't have really takeaways when we grew up. Mum didn't have the money for that type of thing. So it was this like cool thing of suddenly someone's buying me and mum a Pizza Hut pizza of a weekend. And he'd buy me clothes, he'd buy me objects, he'd in essence look after me, he'd take us out for meals, me and my mum, my granddad and my brother, and he'd pay for it. And it'd be £150, he'd just pay for it. And his parents were very wealthy and he got money from them. He was in the fire service, so he had money there. And it just continued. And I remember the first few years of us being together, it was hard because I got a job in a new gym and everything else. And I came away from who I was. I stopped going out. I then stopped drinking. During this time, I started to look at bodybuilding. But I remember that first 3 years, I was nauseous every morning. I had tests with the doctors. I had everything, investigated to see if there was something wrong. Was I pregnant? Was it something to do with hormones? Blah, 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 blah. And then it came down to that it was stress related. And that was the pressure, the jealousy, and everything that happened with Kieran got on top of me. It was an anxiety, it was a stressor, and that's what it was. And I remember from that point, I would always be fighting back at him. I'd say, I'm not gonna be with anyone else. That's not me. I don't cheat. It's not, I've been cheated on. I'm not gonna cheat on you. I then fell into this sort of, this is the best I'm gonna get. And we went on some holidays together, expensive holidays. I was earning money, my first wage. I was able to start saving up, and we said about getting a mortgage. And then I found myself, we started making plans to get married, and it was like, okay, this is the best it's going to get. And like I say, I found bodybuilding. And when I found bodybuilding, that was the first time actually that I've said, throughout a few of these times, that I found purpose in other people. So when I'd go out drinking, I'd find purpose to be the one that would stick up for others, the one that would be there. But actually, bodybuilding was an intrinsic purpose. It was control. And then I realized I'd never had control in my life, ever. Never. There was nothing that I could pinpoint that I'd had control over. And when I started bodybuilding, my first prep, that unleashed something new. Next level neuroticism. Tracking food for me was fucking neurotic. If I had to cut a green bean in half, I'd cut a green bean in half. I remember when I first started working with Stephen, and he said to me, your spreadsheet of all your macros, there's no way your macros are exact every single day. And I'd say to him, yeah, they are. How can they be? They can't be exact. And I'd say, what do you mean they can't be exact? If I need to cut a green bean in half, whatever. And it actually got to the point where he had to say to me, I want you to go within 5 grams either side of your macro targets and do a week where you don't hit any of your targets on the dot, because this is becoming a controlling and neuroticism behavior. And that's not going to be good for you going through preps if you want to continue as a bodybuilder. But I'd still then, if he didn't clock it, I'd then go back to hitting my macros exact. And then I'd just keep doing that and putting it in my spreadsheet. I'd do my spreadsheet every night. And I said near the start, for me, prep has always been an all or nothing. When I go into prep, the coach is my Bible and I ain't fucking around. I will do whatever it takes in a prep to get to stage knowing I've done everything to the letter. And this then transpires into the elements of, I guess, burying myself in bodybuilding and not taking ownership of the relationship between Kieran and I being so bad. I didn't like him as a person, I never did, but I thought he would offer me security. And through bodybuilding and prepping, that then turned into prepping every year for 10 years, seasons back to back. And I never really took stock of what was going on and how much I was burying myself in bodybuilding, because I'd always be clocking for the next prep. I'd then go into that balls deep and wouldn't have to deal with any of my problems. I'd be so fucked by the tail end that I didn't need to even address it. And then this then continued to lead to me then, when I was in prep at the start of my competitive career, I felt again when I did a post about this the other day, where's my red carpet? I'd do everything within my preps and I'd expect to come home and Kieran to go, well done, you've done everything. Or for people at work in the leisure centre I worked at to be like, wow, you're doing so much towards your preps. And I went through this phase of like feeling like everyone should be bowing down to me and going, wow, well done, look what you're achieving. Then I soon realized that this is a fucking choice. Yes, be open and communicate that it's hard at times. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you shouldn't. But when you're fucking moaning all the time that this is so hard, I'm so hungry, I'm this, I'm that, and you're looking for excuses to not do what is required for you to get to stage, I personally feel like, actually, are you in a victim mindset and you're making this choice for other reasons than to improve your physique and to work on yourself, to push into discomfort? Because why are you doing this to yourself? Even for the pure standpoint of what you do health-wise in a prep, why would you do that if you're going to moan about it all the time in your Instagram stories or to people that don't give a shit, external people, and then moan in your own head and lean into hunger and cheat on your diet and say that bodybuilding's caused this and bodybuilding's done this? When actually, is it because you have previous experiences and habits, problems, whatever we want to call it. And actually bodybuilding has highlighted that. And perhaps you need to work on yourself, because it will bring out, I think, the real you. When you're knee deep in prep, you have these moments of like epiphanies of thought processes where you go, fucking hell, I didn't know I felt like that. And then there's a reason for that. It's because maybe these are things that you haven't addressed outside of prep that you need to. So anywho, I buried myself in bodybuilding. And that's where I started to equate bodybuilding saving me. That was how I felt for quite some time. And that built a bigger divide between Kieran and I. There was periods of time, so we ended up getting a house together and a mortgage. And there was periods of time where I got him a coach. I tried to infuse him to do the gym and stuff like this. But he'd come to the gym and be so negative that the session would be shit. I'd be trying to get him to train with me and he didn't want to, and all of this type of stuff. And at this point, I'd done 3 seasons where I wasn't successful. I didn't place in my first 2 seasons. And then my 3rd season, I came 6th. And this spans over like 4 years by the time I go in and out of prep. And then I remember that a big turning point for me was when my granddad died. And he was, like I say, my everything. He was here for all of this. And when he died, there was a switch in my mindset. And Victoria, who listens to this, a very, very dear friend of mine and a client as well, remembers me saying this to her. When Grandad died, I realised that nothing would ever hurt me to that degree, so that meant everything would be okay. I could deal with anything. It was then I went on to have my most successful season as a competitor. In 2019, I won the regional my first show of the year with UKUP. I then came 2nd at Body Power. I got my pro card with NFM UK. I won the UKUP finals. I won a local-ish show, not local to me, but like an independent show, the Rhinos Classic, which qualified me for WABA Miss Universe. And I won WABA Miss Universe in Mexico. And I won my WABA Pro card. That season was fucking insane. But on top of losing my granddad and then experience success in the sport, I started to get closer to understanding that Kieran would never be the right person for me. But could I accept that and carry on, or would I break away? And this started to unleash a different thought process and behavior around him. And I never told anyone about any of this, not even my mum. 1, I was ashamed. 2, if I wasn't willing to do something about this relationship, what was the point in telling other people that I was incredibly unhappy and that I wasn't prepared to do anything about it? What's the point? Why am I moaning about something that I have a choice in? But I couldn't get away from him. I could not find the strength to leave. And by this point, we were married. We had a mortgage. We had 2 dogs. How would I get away? And I remember when we got married, we didn't have sex on the night of our marriage, and we didn't have sex from when we got married till I left for 3 years. And I remember still thinking that it was something wrong with me. At first, when we got together, as you do, we were sleeping together, it was exciting, etc. Probably really the first time it was like an exciting thing for me per se. And Then it just died off. And then I was like, oh, okay, so we're getting married. That's normal. Again, it's like you hear when you get married, it's normal to not have sex. You don't do that anymore, or it's like becomes this routine thing that you do on a Wednesday night at 6 p.m. when the kids are in bed, this type of thought process. And I thought it was normal. And then it got to the point where we wouldn't even kiss. And it started to got to the point where I'd say about this, I'd say, why don't you want me? Why don't we kiss? Why is it like this? And like I say, when I became successful in the sport of bodybuilding, I realized I could be good at something through my own efforts, and it empowered me. It truly did. And then COVID hit. This for me was a big, big turning point. I was forced to be in that house, bar walking the dogs every single hour of every day with Kieran. He went into gaming, and it's something I didn't realize he was into at the start. And his dad, it transpires, said that he used to do it a lot before he was with me, and I became his new toy per se, and he didn't do it. And then in COVID, he was being paid to be off work, and I was as well. And he started gaming. And at first it was quite cool because I actually didn't want to spend time with him. I didn't actually like him, like I say, and that's true. And he'd do 4 hours at a time, and it was like, okay, so I can do my home training, I can do my food prep, whatever. Then COVID went on and on and on. It ended up being like 2 years or whatever. So I started making all of our food. Then he started doing 6 hours, 8 hours. And I remember I'd get up in the morning, walk the dogs, make our breakfast, take it to him on the computer. He didn't want to walk the dogs with me. Then I'd take him his lunch. Then I'd do my training or whatever. Then I'd take him his dinner. And then I'd do my yoga, do some drawing, whatever. And then I remember I'd be walking along with the dogs, and I'd be thinking, why, like, I'm bored of this, of moaning in my own head that I'm not doing anything about this. I'm so sad. Why is this happening? Why do I deserve this? Why am I in this marriage where, I'm gonna put it straight. I'd walk around naked in the house to try and get a reaction out of him to see if he'd want to have sex with me, because we're talking 2 years, 3 years. We didn't have sex. We didn't even snog. We'd like kiss on the cheek, and that was normal. And it was so doom and gloom. And then I did 2 preps during COVID, and both of those preps, the first one, as it gets to the tail end, like I spoke about, you become very emotional, you have epiphanies. And I remember it started to get to the point where I'd walk along with the dogs. I didn't have the gym, I didn't have anyone else. No one knew this was happening. I was training at home. And I'd walk along, and I'd sometimes see a car coming, and if it wasn't for the dogs being there, I'd think, should I just step in front of the car? Because then it's easier. It's easier because I don't need to be here anymore. Why? What's my purpose here? I'm making 3 meals a day for someone that's sitting on a computer game that doesn't want me. I'm unattractive. I'm doing all of this with my physique, but I'm still not wanted by my husband. What have I done wrong? Why is this happening? And then I did my second prep during COVID. I don't know what happened. I can't describe it. One day I woke up and I said to myself, it's the end. And by this point it had increased in my communications with Kieran that this was not what I deserved. I started to have this shift. From when I became successful, it was slowly, but then it started to increase in volume. But I was still having at least once a week where I'd cry and I'd beg him and say, why don't you want me? Why? What have I done? And he'd say, I don't know what's wrong with me. I love you. I'm sorry, but I'm depressed. I'm low in mood. And then I'd say, I can help you. I love you. And then I was trying to help him, and I'd say to myself, I'm a victim. I'm a victim. He's a victim. I can help him, and we can be stronger together. And I kept doing this. And then one day I was like, no, I'm not fucking doing this anymore. And for some reason, by this point, I must add, he was doing 12 to 18 hours in one hit on his computer game. And I just said to him, that's it now. COVID started to ease. I started to see that I could have a life beyond this. And I said, it's over. He cried and he cried and he cried. And I said, I told you one day this would happen if you didn't do something, if you didn't stop doing the game and help me make this work together. I didn't want to give up on our marriage. I didn't want to throw the towel in. But it got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore. And the day I left that house was the first day that I saw colour on the trees. The first day I saw the sun. I looked around and I realised there is so much to life. I was free. I it's hard to describe what it was like, but genuinely I looked up at all the trees and the plants around me and I saw colour. And I stepped away from being a victim. I decided that I had to take control of my life and I had to do that through a choice myself. No one else could do that for me. And I spent 2 weeks at my mum's to make sure it was the right decision. When I realised it was the right decision, that I didn't need to be with him anymore, I could step away. However messy that was going to be, I couldn't do it anymore. I went back. I told him that was the decision. He pushed back a lot, cried, told me he could make it work. I had phone calls from his parents and everything else. He told me he was going to end his life, but I said to him, I've nearly ended my life wanted to end my life several times. No one knew. It was just me that said that. I begged you to want me. I begged you to put effort in, but you chose your computer game. You chose that you didn't want to work on our relationship. It's over, and I had to stand strong to that. His dad phoned me and offered me £10,000 to stay with him. Said we could go on holiday together. And I said, I'm sorry. I don't want your money. I don't want to go on holiday with Kieran. I want to be happy. Please let me be happy. And I spent 8 months living in the house with him, and that was hard. While we he brought me out. We got divorced. It was a long process. It was hard, and there was times where it was like being in prison, because we were living in this house coexisting, and eventually he realized it was the end, but it was hard to live around that. And then when I moved out, it was scary. The first time I went to view a flat to live on my own, I broke down to my stepdad and I said, I can't do this. I can't live in a little flat with white walls and one bedroom. It scared the shit out of me. I'd come from a home with two dogs, Kieran. It was hard. And I ended up living in a few different places until I met Matt, and we started our life together. And when Matt and I first got together, like I said earlier, it's hard to quantify what we have. It's very hard to quantify what we have in words. I've never felt anything like this. And I truly believe that actually everything in my life that I experienced got me to this day where I will never ever stop showing him how grateful I am and showing him how I love him. We both say we're wet blanket mode because we just love each other so much and just want to be together all the time. And I think sometimes people might have that opinion that surely you can't want to be together all the time. What is it? What is this real? I can tell you it genuinely is. I've never seen or experienced anything like this. It's mental. And Matt's been through some hard times. We spoke about, he came on the pod a couple of weeks ago about his own journey through what he's experienced. And consequently, we both now, when we entered our relationship, it was like we want to tell each other every day we love each other. We want to show each other, but it's not effort required. This is organic, it's natural. And we've had challenges ourselves, you know. Not everyone got on board with us being together. When we first got together, we were both, Matt came out of a long relationship. I was seeing someone of the same friendship group. It wasn't easy. It was a bit messy, as we might want to call it. But we realized when we started to have feelings for each other, it wasn't until we'd come away from those relationships, it wasn't until we realized that we were genuinely best friends first. It was a quick friendship. It was very intense, very quick. There wasn't any feelings, and I mean that there wasn't feelings like that. You've got to remember as well, by this point, you know, sex for me wasn't, it wasn't a drive, it wasn't a thing like that, was not. And Matt was in a relationship, and for me, like with Kieran, it's not my vibe. I don't do that. It's not something for me. And from this friendship, and then realizing when we came away from our previous partners that actually there was something more there, when we were able to, we then started our relationship, and life is completely different. It's like everything's evaporated from everything I've spoken about today. It's like it's not there anymore. It's like an out of body experience. And when I get upset about it, like I said, it's a sadness for that person. But being here right now where I am today, it's enabled me to have what I have with Matt and my current life, and the experiences I have to work with clients, to help people release their full potential, to realize there is hope and there is strength, is a gift in my mind. And it's not something everyone has, because through trauma, through life experience, we can become someone that people can resonate with, that people can know that there is strength in struggle, and people can know there is light. And I don't know what the best way to end this episode is, but it's, for me, like I said right at the start, I'm in a place of influence. I'm in a place where I'm in people's ears every week, if you listen to the pod, where people would resonate with me already. I've made some good friends and connections through doing the podcast. And I guess what I want to do is say that there is always hope, there is always strength, and that if you're going through something right now, if something is on the horizon that you don't know about, if you have had past experiences that have brought trauma to your life, that have brought hardship, I promise you there is light. And if you can step away from feeling like you're a victim, from, I spent years right in the marriage going, I'm going to leave one day, I don't want this, then I'd put more effort in, then another week would pass and another week would pass, and I'd say to myself, I'm bored of this. Why am I letting myself do this? I get angry with myself. I get angry that I wasn't doing anything. What happened that day, who knows? I made that decision to take control. I took ownership for my situation, and I decided to move away from being a victim and control my own happiness and my own future. And I guess we can leave it there, knowing that if you dig deep, understand that if you resonate with things I've said today, and that maybe you are in that mindset where it's, you're maybe constantly focusing on the negatives in your life rather than practicing gratitude for what you have and looking to enhance your life, telling yourself it's going to be okay, working towards it being okay. Like I say, coming away from that mindset that you can change your life, but you have to do that. And no amount of security or financial stability is worth your unhappiness. And that's where I'm going to leave it today. I hope that anyone that resonates feels that they can send me a message on Instagram, get in touch. And I hope that I can offer you strength if you are struggling, and if you have got things in your past that you're ready to deal with. Thank you for listening, and I will speak to you very, very soon.